So these are the pieces that I have so far that I've made to be able to demonstrate for you guys about how to do some glazing techniques. The things that I'm going to show you very simple techniques today, basically our basic dipping and how to apply stain. Okay, those are the two things I'm going to show. Then when we come back on Thursday, I'm going to get to the rest of it. So I'm going to try and keep this minimal. I'm going to try and keep this to about a half hour, right? So we're going to be a little bit quick. Sound good? All right. So what was the step one?
Make sure it's bisque fired.
Armando, right there. Make sure it's bisque fired. Step one. Don't forget step one. If you forget step one, you're going to ruin your, well, you don't necessarily ruin your objects, but you could ruin a lot of other people's objects. Okay, you don't want to be responsible for that, right? Step two is to wipe the surfaces. I have wiped the surfaces on all of these pieces except for this little guy, right? So I have a bucket here just so I don't have to keep going to the sink. You guys can do the same if you would like, right? But you don't want your sponge to be wet like this. You want to squeeze most of the water out of it, and then it's just a wiping of the surface, okay? On any little handles or anything that you have, you want to just be careful. Don't press on them too hard because remember, they're not fired all the way to their maturity level, okay? So they're more fragile, okay? Anybody have kids in here? Oh man, nobody. Me neither. I can't use my analogy I was about to use, but you know, kids are more fragile than adults are, right? So this is like a kid. You got to treat it like a kid. It can't be handled aggressively, right? I went on the inside of here. I go on the inside of here. I don't necessarily have to get all the way inside of there because it's got a small opening. I doubt a bunch of dust fell inside of this little teeny tiny hole. But when I wiped off this guy, I wiped off the entirety of the inside. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? The other reason why we want it to be bisque fired first is because now I can handle it like this. I can handle it like this. I have to be gentle if I'm holding it by anything like this, right? But it's possible, okay? And over here, there is this drawer system that has a bunch of stuff inside of it. And most importantly, in this drawer, there's these little guys that are called dipping tongs, okay? These are made for glazing, right? There's all sorts of other things that are inside of here. You know, who knows what you would need this for, but if you need it, we got it, right? This is something we can use to, I don't even think it's supposed to be in this drawer, but this is a whisk, so we can mix stuff up, smaller batches of things, like our slips or something like that. There's a whole slew of other things down there, like little containers that have lids, containers we can use to pour one glaze in versus a different glaze, okay? I'll show you some of that stuff later. But there's a bunch of stuff that's in there, so take a look in there and see what's inside, all right? But I'm gonna grab these dipping tongs because the dipping tongs I'm gonna be using, all right? So I'm gonna show you guys how to simply dip an object, which is this object. If I use the dipping tongs, it makes my life really easy because I can take these dipping tongs and I can grab a hold of this object and I can hold it like this. And let's imagine that this was my dipping area. I'm gonna dip it down into the glaze and give it a spin and then bring it out. And then I'm gonna do this so I can get all that stuff to drip off and wait for the glaze to stop moving. And then I can take it and put it upright like this on the table and the glaze dipping tongs will still be connected to there. And then I very carefully remove them quickly so they don't drag on the surface. And if that happens, these are designed. They've got a little point on them. That point collects liquid glaze around it. So when I let go of the dipping tongs, it drops glaze into those holes. If you do it right. Okay, does that make sense? At that point in time, if I do that, I'm gonna have glaze right here. But this is where it sticks, where it goes to the shelf. So I'm gonna have to wipe it off. When we wipe off the bottoms, we wipe it 1/4 of an inch off the bottom, all right? Don't deviate from that 1/4 of an inch off the bottom. I know it might look funny, right? Everybody's like, yeah, but the ones that are at Walmart, the glaze goes all the way down to the bottom. True. But also the ones at Walmart have glaze on the very bottom too. Because the ones at Walmart were fired to a low temperature and they have these things that are called stilts where it sits up on this little stilt that's made of nichrome wire. And it leaves 3 little dots on the bottom of the piece. And if you look really carefully on some of those low fired pieces, you can see where those little things are. where those little pieces of nichrome wire were. You can't use anything other than nichrome wire because nichrome wire is a high temperature wire. It can withstand the high temperatures, but it can't withstand, it has a trouble withstanding up to cone 6. It starts to move and bend at cone 6. So if you have a really lightweight object, sometimes it can work, but if it's a heavier object, it won't work. So don't rely on stilts. Rely on wiping your piece 1/4 of an inch up off the bottom, and I'll show you how to do that once we get this thing dipped. All right, so this wall right here, this wall is all of our different glazes. This little section, all the way over to here, is just some rando pieces that have been glazed, like the white glaze over top of a rebang, the white toilet bowl white over top of licorice. This is just white on white. I don't know what that's doing there. Hint of mint, I think this is over white, right? So they're different colors like that. Oh, I'm sorry. Up to that one. Get on there. From here over to here, these are our stains. Rutile stain, black stain, iron stain, cobalt stain, okay? These are stains with no glaze, stains with clear glaze, right? On the white clay, on the, sorry, is that the, no, this is the sculpture clay. Yeah, that's the sculpture clay, which we don't use. This is the speckled buff, this is the B-mix. B-mix, sculpture clay, speckled buff, okay? Same thing with our colors. This right here, this is all B-mix, this whole range. These are all the different glazes that we have here on the B-mix clay. So if you have white clay, you want to look on this level. Oxidation, reduction, oxidation, reduction. Oxidation, reduction tells you down here what it is. Also tells you on the back of this object what it is. Make sense? If you take these off their little stands, where do you think they go?
Exactly back where you
Right back where it belongs, right? Not just randomly. Put it back where it belongs, okay? So, that's a speckled buff piece. So I'm looking at this level right here to find out what it is that I want to glaze my little thing, okay? So, I don't know. What do you guys think?
Do it red.
Which one? Nah, don't do red.
I'm gonna go simple, so I don't want to have a lot of color necessarily.
What piece are you
I
doing?
want to be able to see those little dimples in there. Okay, so
Do the green one.
you know what? I think I'm gonna do a thin layer of ocean green, which is this one right here. Right? So, and when I do this, I think I'm not 100% sure. Let me look. So here are my choices. I kind of like ocean green a little bit better in reduction than in oxidation. And see what it does to the clay too? That's your speckled buff in reduction and your speckled buff in oxidation. So the glaze is, or the clay is going to change quite a bit. With our white clays, you don't see it change quite as much, but it does change a little bit. See, that's the same glaze. Reduction, oxidation. We get a little bit of a changeover in the color of the white clay. All right? So important to take a look at what these are when we're using them. This layer, unless you take the R35 class, you don't need to worry about that level up there, because that's our sculpture clay and what our glazes look like on our sculpture clay. All right? Sorry, that's an annoying noise. All right, so I said, ocean green, right here. So ocean green is in one of our buckets, all right? So if I want to use this, really important thing, the lid says ocean green, right? But what if a really bad student was here in the glaze room, or they were really rushed and they're trying to get to their next class, and they had 2 glazes open, and they threw a lid on one, and then they threw a lid on the other one, and they ran away, and they accidentally put the ocean green lid on the toilet bowl white. And you go ahead and you write down ocean green, and you dip it inside of the ocean green, and then it comes out of the thing, and it's totally white. And you come up to me and you say, Brian, why is this thing white? I dipped it in the ocean green. I said, there's no way you would ever have dipped that into the ocean green and it would come out white. It's impossible, right? So what that means is that somebody switched the lids, which is why we also put the name of the glaze on the bucket. It also has all of the materials listed down there as to what it is. So if you're curious, right, and you want to know what makes up ocean green, this is just your base glaze right here, the top part, and then the separate part down here is the colors. Copper carbonate, rutile, and red iron oxide. All of those are stains that are right there, right? Just, they're put into a different proportion to make it come out a specific color. Ocean green is one of those glazes that kind of has a little bit of romanticism built into it as well, because it changes a little bit. It's not all one color, it kind of has some variations, right? So, whenever we're using it, we can take it and set it right on that next thing, unless somebody's looking for the white crawl and they're like, I can't find the white crawl glaze, where'd it go? Right? Well, it's right there. Okay? You can also do this. Okay, that's not going to hurt anything. Now, we have some whisks. We have whisks right here. These are good to mix the buckets. They're really giant whisks. These paddles right here are for canoeing. No, they're for doing the big buckets right here. Okay? So, you want to use the right tool for the right thing. You kind of can use these for this. They'll reach down there, but you might have your hand in the glaze a little bit. This one's a bit longer. Not much, but a bit longer, right? These buckets also have like a little channel on the outside edge, so you can actually get this down in there. It's been designed for these buckets specifically, because it's typically these style of buckets that we use in ceramics in every studio that's in the country for the most part, right? All right, so our cone 6 glazes are all in these trash cans that are around here, or they're in these buckets here. These here are raku glazes, which we're not going to get into in this class, right? Unless you guys are really, really, really epically lucky, but probably not. It's been a long time I've done a raku glaze for a beginning class. Tends to make everybody want to do raku, but maybe we'll do one at the end. We'll see how it all plays out. And then what are all these up here? Slips. Okay? So you want to make sure that you're applying the right ones, because if you try and come over here and use a raku glaze, these are the raku glazes from 04 to 06. All of our trash can glazes and bucket glazes over here are cone 6. If you put a raku glaze into a cone 6 firing, it's just going to all run off onto the shelf and it's going to look really weird, right? They're made specifically for a certain style of firing, right? So, ocean green, I'm going to take my whisk down in here, I'm going to get all the way to the edge, and I'm going to really move this stuff around. It's not like, hey Rita, how was your weekend? Pretty good? All right, it's ready to go, right? No, we got to get in there. Really mix it up. Then if you want to take the whisk out, give it a tap, light tap, so it doesn't splash everywhere. All right? Reason why I'm doing this is because I don't want to waste the glaze, okay? Also, if you want to, if there's room over here, you can actually just take your lid and set your thing on top of there, all right? Now, pay attention. It doesn't take long to do this. I can't do it slowly. I got to do it the right way. I'm going to take this, I'm going to get it in there, I'm going to kind of move it around, count to 1, dip it out, do this, right? Glaze is not really moving any longer, so I can take it and I can move it onto here. It's still shiny, but the glaze is not moving anymore. And then I take this and pull it off real quickly, and the holes that used to be there are no longer there, right? Because that glaze was there, it sucked it in. Now, if I'm not going to use these, right away, I take them over here. You don't even have to turn on the water. Mix it around like this. Look at how clean that is. Amazing. It's like those infomercials where they clean like the mixers or like the Vitamix or whatever. Like, all you got to do is rinse this thing off, and then you try it at home and you're like, this doesn't work. Do that and it all comes off. The last thing I'll do is just give it a light rinse in here, because there's some material that's in there, right? So we just want to kind of lightly rinse it off like that. You don't need to scrub. If you let these sit there for any length of time, then you're going to have to go over there with a sponge and sponge them off. But if you get them, that's the key that like Billy Mays or, you know, those people that give those infomercials, that's the thing they don't tell you, is that you got to do it right away. You make a smoothie in your mixer, and if you let it sit there while you enjoy your smoothie, by the time you get back to your mixer connect or little, thing. It's going to be all stuck to the side, and you're going to have to use a brush. Yes.
You got a notification.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
It was in your interior garage thing.
Oh, it's not mine. It's my mom's.
Oh, okay.
They have a fancy security system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
All right. So you don't need to dry them off. There's no need to do that, right? This can go right back in there. It's a mesh little drawer system, so it keeps everything good to go. That's how simple it is to get one coat of glaze, right? So now if I look at this, I can look around and I see that there's no shiny section of this. If it's not shiny, I can actually touch it. I can pick it up, right? Because it's already dry. All the water has soaked in there. It's not like waiting for paint to dry. Now I can look in here and I see that on the inside, you see this little camera? There's a little mark right there. That's where there's no glaze. And that's because when I put it in there in that small container, it's kind of hard. An air bubble got trapped in there when I did it. Okay, same thing as if I took this object and put it down in this way, it wouldn't glaze the entirety of the inside because it would trap air in there. That's why I went in at an angle. I put it in like this and turned it around, and then I pulled it out, twisting it, right? Because if you go like this directly in and then directly out, you get more glaze here than you get here. So when I go in and I twist it, and then I twist it as I come out. And then that hopefully will get more of a homogeneous surface of glaze on this object. Now, what I can do is I can come over here, and it's been a little bit since I dipped in here. So I need to come back and give it a stir. Even if it's been like a minute, right? You give it a little stir. I'm gonna take my finger and dip my finger in there and just push my finger down into that little spot where the glaze was missing. And that's all I have to do. Right? Then I take my lid, get my lid back onto ocean green, because if I can get my lid back on, then we lose less water. And if we snap the lids on, it's better than just pushing it on there. So now you can see that there's some glaze in that little spot, okay? Now, everything's dry on this, so I'm gonna take a sponge. This is why I like you guys to have your own big sponge, because those sponges get nasty, right?
Yeah.
And they have all sorts of like junk on them from wiping off the floor and wiping off the table and who knows what, okay? They probably have food particles in them too from people wiping their McDonald's off the table, I don't know. So I always have my own sponges to be able to do the bottom, right? So wiping the bottom is really easy if you do it correctly. You take it and push it down a little bit and just spin. And now I've gotten almost all the glaze off there. Not all of it quite yet, but I got a lot of it off of there. Now I turn it over to the other side and I do the same thing. And now there's no glaze on this object. And look, if I set it on the table, and Yolixa, if you could come down here and show, about 1/4 inch off the top, off the bottom, okay? So that way there's a bare section there. That bare section leaves room for if that glaze runs a little bit. Okay, does that make sense? So, the final step is really, really important. You always have to wipe your bottom. You guys learned that a long time ago, right? Always wipe your bottom. Nobody walks away and doesn't wipe their bottom. We do the same thing in ceramics. Okay, sound good? I mean, I guess unless you have a bidet, I don't know. But even then, you're taking care of it, all right? So, that's as much as we need to do to this object if we just want it to be ocean green. Right? Maybe I want to change things up a little bit and I want to dip another color on top of this. So, let me think about it for a second. I got ocean green right there.
do the cracking one.
Do the blue one.
Do the cracking
Well,
one.
Crackle white, so here's the thing about crackle white. Not a good glaze for pottery because it almost renders this useless, right? If I want to have something in this and drink out of it, right, or eat out of it, and I have a bunch of like crackly bits like that on it, look at how crackly this stuff gets, right? This is not sanitary because basically it's going to work like your cheese grater when you try and wash it, right? It's just going to rip your sponge up that you're trying to use to clean it. And all little bits of bacteria can get inside of all those little cracks. So the glassy glazes are the ones you want to use for anything that is used for eating off of. The turquoise matte, I think this one, if I remember right, This one uses strontium. Is it? Yeah, strontium carbonate at 20%. This is a sculpture glaze. Don't use this on your objects because otherwise, strontium's a radioactive material. It's not like if I do this, it's going to kill me, right? It's kind of like lead, right? You know, you don't. But people drink wine out of leaded wine glasses all the time. They still make leaded wine glasses, but you can't find ceramic objects that are glazed with lead anymore. They don't exist. They used to all the time. They used to think it was a good idea for you to ingest a little bit of that, right? But then they figured out that it's actually not. I mean, you've got to consume a lot of wine to be able to, like, actually get lead poisoning from drinking out of wine glasses. They're very thin. So I would stay away from strontium. You can use this on the outside of pottery, but not on the inside where it's going to come in contact. Especially, you know, with lead, with strontium, with barium, with lithium, all those kind of nasty materials. Those come out, they leach into whatever it is that you're eating, especially if it's acidic, right? So if you're drinking orange juice out of it, is everything okay?
Yeah.
Or if you're drinking, or if you're having like gazpacho, right? Because it has a lot of tomato in it.
Isn't wine acidic?
Right? What's that?
Isn't wine acidic?
Wine is acidic, yeah. But wine out of a leaded crystal glass actually tastes, it makes the wine taste better, honestly, right? But there, a lot of the industry's going away from that as well. So anyways, this is more for the outside. So if you have anything like that, you just don't want to have that strontium leach into anything. So I would say this is not food safe. This is not food safe, this is not food safe, and the Devon's dry matte is not food safe because it is a dry matte glaze. If you feel it, it feels almost like a really light sandpaper, like an 800 or a 600 or 300 or something. It's really matte. And when you have a matte surface like that, you can't clean it very easily. You want that shiny surface to be able to clean. That's one of the things that Glaze does, if you remember from that thing we were talking about. All right? So let's say I want to put something else on the top of this.
If you put the turquoise one, would it change the whole thing?
Ooh, I know what I'm going to do. Sorry. Yes, it probably could, but I don't know. I don't know what that would turn out like. I'm going to use the licorice. So all these are on wheels, so if you want to use them, get them out here, right? We're not going to use that. Can somebody actually clean that off for me? Thank you. You might need to use a sponge on it. So when you use these paddles, first off, you want to just take a look at it and make sure that the previous human did their due diligence and actually cleaned it off because we don't want to contaminate. And it's hard for you guys to see, but when I look down in here, I can actually see there's a layer of water about 1/4 of an inch thick on the top of this glaze. You won't be able to see it with the camera. It's really hard to see. It's more of a human eye kind of a thing. So when I do something like these buckets, you got to get in here. We're getting towards Halloween, aren't we? Right?
It's a cold.
It's like a witch's brew, right?
Oh, I'll get you, my pretty.
Like move this stuff around. You got to get it going, right? Scrape the bottom. Make sure that you get into the little nooks and crannies. If you pull it out and you see sludge, right? You see that sludgy junk right there? That's stuff, that heavy materials that were down at the bottom that I need to work it a little bit longer. So the bigger buckets, they take a little bit longer to stir and get them complete and ready to use. But the better you stir them, the more consistency you're going to get in the way your glazes come out, and your glazes are going to work properly, all right? Because all of our glazes stay in pretty good suspension. All right, so there we go. Can somebody take this and rinse it real quick? You can actually, with that thing too, just get it in the sink. Use the sink stuff first. If you go too deep in the sink with any of these, there's sludge at the bottom sometimes, depending on how recently it's been cleaned out. Okay, so just think about that. Now, what I can do is I can just kind of think about how I want to do this, and maybe I just want to give a really quick kind of sideways dip. You want to come over here? Let's see it happen. Give it something like this, right? That could look pretty cool. And maybe I just take it on the other side and give it a little smaller dip in there. Sometimes when I do this kind of stuff, I like to go for just a little bit of asymmetry, because that's my style. Doesn't mean that it's your style. Maybe you want to make things exact, right? But I like the fact that this has a little less, this has a little bit more. It's a subtle change, but it changes it up a little bit. So then when you look on the inside of the piece has an interesting shape that's there as well. And so this is the licorice is a black glaze, so it's going to be a starker contrast to that green glaze that's there. So we'll see how it ends up coming out. Who knows? I don't even know if I've used these two glazes before. Now, this right here still has a satiny appearance where both of those kind of went over top of each other. So I want to be careful with that, right? I'm going to take this and handle it very gently and just set it down like this, okay? Make sense, everyone? All right, so last thing I'm going to show you guys, that's the other reason why I like having one of these around. My own sponge and my bucket is because I can just do cleanup so much easier without having to run the water, all right? You guys already know about my environmental tendencies.
I feel them.
I like to minimize my water use. It's the #1 resource I think that we use in ceramics, even more than clay, is water, right? And we gotta have enough water to drink, right? We got a lot of people in this world. So, with this piece, I'm gonna show you guys how to use the stains, okay? This piece has those nice little stamps that I stretched, right? And other little bits that I stretched to make that kind of appearance. I'm gonna use the black stain. Now, something to note for all of this stuff that we have here in the Glaze studio. Don't wear your best clothes in here. All of this stuff will stain, right? That's why every time I come in, I'm wearing a shirt that has something to do with ceramics, because I don't wear these shirts when I go out on the town, right? I only wear them when I'm in the studio, okay? We have this nice newfangled brush container over here, but you can see that our brushes are not nice and new and fangled, right? So I'm just gonna get one that looks like it's gonna work for what I need. Oh, let me close this guy. Make sure the lid is on there completely, put it back into place. So this stuff is really watery, okay? It's watery, it has a little bit of a material in here called Guernsey borate, which is basically a low fire glaze on its own. So it just kind of helps it stick to the glaze a little bit better. When we use stain, if I'm gonna use stain in all of its glory and all of its power, I would be putting it on the outside of glaze, like using a brush. I can brush on, maybe I'll show you that in a second too, but I need to get my brushes out because I don't like those school brushes. Might be a good idea for you guys to invest in a couple of brushes. Don't buy good brushes though. Just buy brushes that have a tip that look like they'll work, that are cheap, right? And the reason why is because we don't need like nice hair brushes like people do for doing oil paintings, right? We don't need that brushability. We just need to be able to get it on there, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint this with this black stain. And I'm gonna be careful because if I brush too aggressively, it's gonna spray all over the place, right? But this is gonna stain the clay body, all right? You can even use a sponge to do this, all right? Oh, here.
Oh, thank you. I can see now.
First, I want to give a shout out to Yalixa for being my cinematographer. I've never had anyone kind of video me doing these things, but I figured that it's probably a good idea because I knew that there was some students that were going to be missing today. That way they can take a look at this, and you guys can go on. I'm going to post it on the website so that you guys can see this video. I'm not going to put it up on YouTube because it's just more specific to our class than ceramics in general. So it'll be available on the website. I don't know how I'll do it. Maybe I'll make a new tab that says videos or something in the student area. So, you know, take your time. See how sometimes I'm blotting instead of brushing? Because the blotting will get it into all the little nooks and crannies, and that's what I want it to do. Because when I put this on underneath glaze, because I'm going to glaze over top of this later, but not today, all right? So we don't have to wait for me to do that today. What I'm going to do is I'm just getting it into this clay. I'm getting the black stain on there, and then I'm going to wipe almost all of it off. And when I wipe it, I'm going to wipe it gently so that it stays in the nooks and crannies. and it'll really accentuate all of my marks that I made, okay? And you'll see it kind of come to light as we go. So I want to get all the outside edges too. And you'll notice that every time I dip my brush in here, I'm spinning it around. This stuff settles even more so than Glaze does, okay? If you have anyone that's around you, just kind of warn them and make sure, because you can see that I'm getting a little bit of splashes that are happening here and there, and I'm certainly trying to avoid getting it splashing all over me too, even though I'm wearing my ceramic clothes. All right, now I'm going to do the bottom too, because if I leave that way, then it's going to look completely different on the bottom and the top when I glaze it, all right? So I want to stain the clay body on the bottom too, everywhere. What this stuff does is this material, these little particles that make up the stain are basically soaking into the clay because there's enough, it's porous enough that it'll hold that stuff, all right? And then when I go to wipe it off, it's not going to be white clay anymore. It's going to have a different appearance than the white clay, all right? I'm even going to do where it touches the bottom because, guys, this stuff is not glaze, all right? It's stain. So stain doesn't stick. It has such a small amount, like maybe 10% of that Glassy borate material, and that's just to help it stick to the glazes, right? Especially when you put it on over top, right? And also, some of these materials are so refractory, meaning that it takes so much heat to melt them, that adding that Glassy borate into it will actually help it so that the glaze will stick to the object even when I have the stain here. Now, that's all good to go. Try and get as much of this material off of your brushes and back into here, because then we have more of this material to go around. Get the lid on it. With these, they snap, all right? Snap into place, all right? Now, here's where the magic happens. Not the cleanup part, but. All right, so I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna get most of the water out of the sponge and see I can wipe it off and see how it's no longer white, okay? It's kind of a darker hue, all right? You're not gonna see as much magic happen right now because, and every now and then I'm gonna dip it in there and get some of that stain out of my brush or my sponge. But you notice that, look at my signature. A drier brush, or sorry, a drier one is gonna take it off. You can kind of see that my signature starts to pop out a little bit because that material has stayed in the low spots and I've wiped it off of the high spots. So you're really like, you don't want to leave it full strength anywhere, because even if I leave that much right there on that little spot, it might work as glaze resist, okay? So you got to get majority of it off of there. You can leave, it's going to leave a little bit in this line where I put the foot on. Pretty good. I'll get the rest of it maybe a little bit later. Now I'm going to turn it over so you can see how this stuff ends up looking. All right. So if I take it and I brush along the edge, you can see how much it brings out that edge, where we can see those marks really beautifully. All right. And I'm moving my sponge around to areas where there's less of the stain on my sponge. This is really helpful to have this bucket right next to you, because it's okay that there's, like, look at the water that's in there, it's black, right? But it's so, there's so little black in there that it's not making a big difference, right? So I go in first with a pretty wet sponge. That starts to move most of the stain out of the high spots. Until it gets to your desired aesthetic. Then I can take a drier sponge afterwards and kind of mop up any of those areas that were a little bit shiny, okay? And now you can see that you really see that those stains pop out the beauty of those stamps, okay? You don't have to do this to your stamps. Some of the glazes will do this to your stamps too, but this is just another option. I typically use this when I create a piece that has a bunch of stamps as a texture. I'm probably not going to do it to this piece that just has the buttoned up part. Okay, it's just my aesthetic. That's how I like to do it. Some people might stain that entire thing, the whole outside of it, the inside of it, those areas, and then glaze it with a transparent glaze. Because if I glaze this with an opaque glaze, you're not going to see the stain that you created, right? And it's going to muddle any of your stamps. If you use opaque glazes, if they're not really deep, thick lines from your stamps, then they might get hidden within that glaze, okay? Like this creamy oatmeal, right? This stuff is pretty thick, right? So it's going to cover up. Look at how it covers up the skull on this thing, all right? So you don't want to use some of the thicker glazes to do that. You want to think more about your hint of mint in reduction. Maybe Celsa Uribe in oxidation. Or where's our? I don't think we have a test tile up yet for it. Oh yeah, we do. It's over here. We now have a scrap glaze. Oh, this stuff looks good. Scrap, or some people call it S-crap. This is just like a mixture of a bunch of glazes, right?
So it's recycled glaze?
Yeah, it's basically a recycled glaze. And then Celadon. This is that one I was telling you about that's a really pale green, right? You see that pale green color? This is a transparent glaze. This would look great on top of this, right? Because then you have those, it'll really accentuate those stamps. You'll be able to see it. You want to use a lighter colored glaze on something like this. Now, when you do this and you stain it, I got it really wet, right? Then I took my sponge and I got it even more wet. Do I want to glaze it right now?
No.
What do I want to do?
I want to wait a day.
Wait 1 day. You can leave it overnight and come back tomorrow. It doesn't have to be 24 full hours. Just come back tomorrow and glaze it. Or you can come back the next class period that we have and glaze it. Where do you think you're going to put this?
In your locker?
Either in your locker or back out on the glaze shelves out there. It's up to you. Personally, I would put it back in my locker. Right? Yes.
Okay, so I have a question. When you use stains, do you have to immediately sponge it?
No, you don't have to immediately sponge it. It won't do anything. If you don't have time to get to anything else, you can paint it on there, put it in your locker, and then wipe it off at a later date. But remember, you're still going to have to wait.
Okay.
Because you're going to sponge a bunch of it, right? You're going to add a bunch of water, right? But don't, even though we're adding a bunch of water here, don't just put it underneath the thing, because it's going to take, you put it underneath the thing, it's going to take away everything from these nooks and crannies. You're not going to get the same look like this with the stains, right? Does that make sense, gang? Then what I do is flip it over. Every time I do this, I look at all my surfaces because I want to make sure right here some of that water came through to the back side. So I'm going to go through here and take that off, right? And just double check and make sure that I don't have too much of a thickness of anything anywhere, right? But I know that that looks kind of muddy, right? But once we get a clear glaze on this, or either clear or the Celadon or the S-crap, right? Then that'll be good. Does that make sense? Then when we're done, we basically take all this stuff, we clean everything up, we make sure we wipe the area. Do you guys see this little spot over here with all these like white marks all over the place? That's because somebody used a dirty sponge to wipe up their mess. Sometimes you gotta sponge off areas twice in ceramics to get rid of all that film, okay? I mean, this part doesn't have any film on it, but over there, there's like this massive film. Somebody just basically didn't do what they should have, all right? So, you know what? The next time we're together, I'm gonna show you how to put stain on top of this, because it's like 4:20 right now, and you guys can have a little bit of time to work today. Sorry, this is a long demonstration. There's still going to be more, but glazing is really important. It's really important to see all this stuff done so you guys can at least have a baseline of where to start. And then you could be like, well, hey, Brian, what if I do this? Would that be possible? Hey, Brian, what if I do that? Is that going to be possible? And then I'll let you know. I mean, pretty much anything's possible. You just got to experiment. Sometimes an experiment. Yelixa was asking me earlier, like, can I make like a flat little piece of clay to test stuff out? Sure, you can. But what's better is to make an L-shaped one. There's a picture of it or a drawing I put up on the board. Make an L-shaped one because you want to see what it looks like on a vertical surface, like this. You can make it straight up and down, but they tend to stay more upright and tend to balance better if you make them like a weird L shape like this, like on an angle, right? And then you're gonna dip here about 2/3 down, and then you're gonna dip halfway in between that other section so you can see a single dip and a double dip. Does that make sense? Yeah. Single dip and double dip with most beginning students ends up actually being more like a light dip versus a heavy dip, right? My dip is much different than your dip is. There are three, and I forgot to mention this in the first part, but there are 3 things that are the most important thing about glazing. Application, application, and application. Those are the 3 things that really matter in glazing. The way in which you apply the glaze. That's it, right? Because you'll come to me and say, why is it that when you use the seltzer Arabia it doesn't drip, but when I do it, it drips all over the place? There's one answer, application, right? It's that quick dip, pulling it out, using some force to make that stuff drip off of it, wait for it to not move in suspension any longer, and then flip it right side up, okay? And then there's glazes that are more and less runny than others, and you can see them right here. It lets you know by looking at these things. But remember that these were dipped by professionals. We don't have the students dip these. We actually should do that. We should do an experiment and have the students dip the glazes so we can see the difference between students dipping and professors and
Professionals.
well, yeah, professionals. Yeah.
Make us feel
you know,
bad.
Michael's definitely a professional. So, any questions so far? All right. Sorry it was so long. I tried to be short, but it just doesn't fly with this one. All right. Go back to work, gang, and we'll continue this on Tuesday.